Hi, I'm Julia Bell, and this is the GCC guide to everything you might need to know about the Code of Professional Practice. In this series, we're highlighting the key things you need to be thinking about so you're able to comply with the standards in the new code. And in this episode, we're focusing on professionalism, specifically professional boundaries and standards of personal conduct. Okay, for this video, I'm delighted to be joined by Nick Jones, the GCC's Chief Executive and Registrar, and Andrew Fielding, Policy and Insights Officer. Welcome to you both. Great to have you.
Thanks, Julia. Good to see you. Yeah.
Now, gents, I'm really looking forward to gaining your insight as to the new code and what's changed. But Nick, can I come to you first off? When we talk about professional boundaries, what do we mean when we say that, and how is the new code relevant?
I think when we talk about professional boundaries, we're talking about the way you conduct yourself as a professional. The Code of Professional Practice has 4 values, one of which focuses on professionalism. And the code itself establishes a clear standard around establishing and maintaining clear boundaries between you as the professional and the patient.
And Andrew, how does this differ from the old code?
Okay, so the old code focused really just on sexual boundaries, and it was very much action based. What we've done with the new code, we've moved it to being a knowledge. So you are expected as a chiropractor to understand the professional boundaries and the power imbalance between you and the patient, you and your colleagues. And when you've got that understanding of the power imbalance, you're in a much better position to see where those boundaries are and make sure you don't cross them. The next thing we've done, the boundaries themselves have been expanded. It's not just sexual boundaries. Those are still very important. But you've also got emotional boundaries where you might become emotionally dependent or too friendly with a chiropractor or with a patient. And you've got financial boundaries as well. Things like lending money or expecting discounts or even things like bribery. I mean, there's all sorts of things that would fall under that, where it's an inappropriate relationship for a healthcare professional and a patient to have.
Gosh, bribery and emotionally dependent. Does this sort of thing really happen?
Unfortunately, yes, it does. It's rare. And what we tend to find is that often the healthcare professional, and it's not just chiropractors, it's healthcare professionals right across. But sometimes they get themselves into these situations and don't really realise how deep they've got until it's too late. And so that's why by setting it as a knowledge-based standard, we hope to actually get chiropractors in this case to think about, right, where do those boundaries lie, and to be able to stop a situation before it gets too far. Because these things that get taken very seriously if it does come to sort of fitness to practice or questions around their probity. It's taken very seriously by GCC and by the public and patients as well.
Of course, but human interactions can be nuanced and complicated, so having a code to rely on is really helpful. Perhaps we could dig into that a little bit further when it comes to how this works in practice. So Nick, if a chiropractor wants to ensure they're not breaching a boundary, maybe you can give us some examples of how that would work in practice.
I think what we're talking about here, Julia, is the way in which a professional conducts themselves in a work situation is very different to the way in which you conduct yourself in a private or personal capacity. And it's being conscious and aware of those differences as you carry on with the relationship with the patient, a clinical relationship. What we're not saying is you can't establish a rapport and a friendly and positive relationship with the patient, but one in which you're cautious about the necessity to maintain those boundaries.
The thing is, the scenarios, for example, if a chiropractor has a patient that they already know, maybe you met them at a party a week before, what does the code say about that? How should we move forward with that kind of scenario?
So in those sort of situations, the key thing to remember is that when you are caring for a person, they are a patient. They could be a family member, they could be a friend, they are still a patient, and the standards within the Code of Professional Practice still apply. There is some guidance that sort of accompanies the Code of Professional Practice, and in that we go into a little bit more depth about some of the pitfalls to avoid. If you are treating a family member, then the family member might be a little more reticent about saying, stop, that's hurting me. I'm not comfortable with this situation or with this treatment. The expectations, you're a chiropractor, you charge for your services, but a family friend or a member of the family might assume that they're not paying for care. So there's some questions that you just need to sort of be aware of and think about in advance. I think the other thing that is really important in that it's Principle E1, Standard E1 in Principle E. We recognise that it's a power imbalance, but sometimes the chiropractor's on the receiving end, and actually sometimes the chiropractor can be the victim in these situations. You can have a patient that is stepping over the professional boundary, and in those situations it's a really hard position for the chiropractor to be in, but there's still expectations of professional behaviour, what we expect from them as a professional, even though it's the patient that's stepped over the line.
Yeah.
It's the first time, isn't it, Andrew, that we've given a clear commitment within the standards that a chiropractor can kind of cease treatment if they're concerned about those boundaries being crossed by the patient.
Yeah. And there are expectations there that still leave the patient, still have the patient's best needs at heart, but are very clear that actually the chiropractor has responsibilities and rights in this relationship too.
Yeah. And the difficulty with this, of course, is, chiropractors do a hands-on treatment, and sometimes that can feel intimate or invasive, and it involves at times getting undressed. So can you go into how chiropractors can navigate that and what the code does to support?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Chiropractic care is touch is such an important part of that care. And coming back to that standard, it's about being aware of that as a chiropractor. It's understanding what the patient's view of that will be, because the patient does not necessarily know what to expect. They don't know what's appropriate and what isn't. So if you have to, for instance, move an item of clothing, you need to work on the lower back, so you need the trousers to move down a little bit, move waistband, that sort of thing. It's explaining beforehand. It's gaining that valid consent from the patient. It's not just diving in there and doing what you need to do. It's understanding the patient's experience as well.
Yeah. So you're covering that disclaiming, that communication, and making sure there's best practice there for everybody. Can I ask you now about chaperones? How does that topic feature in the new code?
So chaperones are a very useful tool as a way of protecting both the chiropractor and the patient. There's somebody else in the room that can see what's going on, and I know a lot of chiropractors and a lot of patients take a lot of comfort from having somebody else in the room, but that has to be a decision made in conjunction with the patient. And it's very difficult because chiropractic, there are some places where it's a big clinic, there's a lot of people about, so getting a chaperone is very easy to do. Chiropractors who are working on their own, perhaps don't have the other people around, that's a much harder position to be in. So it has to be a discussion. But in the Code of Professional Practice, there are very clear situations where we think you should always consider, is a chaperone important in this situation? And that particularly includes intimate procedures, and it also includes vulnerable patients. So children, vulnerable adults. If you're in that situation, you always need to consider whether a chaperone is required. Now, there is a difference between considering and actually requiring a chaperone, and that's where that decision comes in. You need to have that conversation with the patient, make sure you're both comfortable, record why you've made that decision, what the thinking was behind that decision.
Okay. And what about when it comes to consent? Does that involve signatures and long forms? Tell us about the process.
No. So there's a lot of confusion around consent, and this idea that everything has to be a tick box and a signature from the patient.
Right.
Consent is a continuous process. You need to be asking the patient all the way through the care, are you comfortable with this? I'm about to do that. Explain what you're doing. A consent from a patient can be as simple as a uh-huh or a nod, just to check that they understand what's happening and they're in agreement with it. There's a whole load of stuff around consent, which I'm sure we'll cover in another video, but it is not about having a signature from the patient for every single piece of consent. And likewise for recording. If you are recording something in your notes, you don't have to have a patient signature to back that up. We just want to be able to see, for our purposes and for your purposes as a chiropractor, to show that you've actually thought about this. You've made that conscious decision, and just having a note to say, yeah, I decided this and why. That's fine. That's adequate.
And having that verbal contract.
Having that verbal contract, having that discussion, so that it really is you and the patient working together for the best, in the best interests of the patient.
Understood. Okay, for this next section, we're going to be joined by Sean McQueen, who supports with registration at the GCC. And together, we're going to talk about the common questions and concerns that come from registrants and how they relate to the new code. So, Sean, great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you.
First off, can you share a little bit about your role?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a registrations officer at the GCC, so it has a very wide scope, and I deal with a number of people. So that would include registrants, general public, new grads, applicants, just everyone on the whole scale of getting into contact with the GCC.
So you're a source of support and advice,
Exactly.
generally.
Yeah.
Great. Let's look at these common questions and concerns that some chiropractors or support might have. The first one is, I'm sure it's rare, but if a chiropractor perhaps gets into trouble with the law or with the police, what does the new code cover with that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and yeah, you're right, it's quite rare. So with the new change to our Code of Professional Practice, that would relate to, I believe, C15, the new standard. So essentially what that means is if someone does get arrested, for example, they don't necessarily have to contact us straight away. It's usually when they get into the conviction or charge stage, that's when we would want them to contact us. And we want that within 7 days of that actually coming through, them getting notified. That's the real change that we want to really get out there.
Okay. So there's a distinction between arrest and conviction or charge.
That's correct. Yeah.
That's really helpful. Thank you. What about in the instance, and again, I hope it's rare, but if a chiropractor is dealing with a patient who is abusive, or if the support staff are dealing with that, what does the code cover in that respect?
It is rare, but it's significant when it happens, and I want to be very clear that a chiropractor shouldn't have to deal with abuse and inappropriate behaviour, and when it happens, the chiropractor is perfectly entitled to make arrangements for ending that care. Obviously, we expect the care to be ended as professionally and as carefully as possible, and the chiropractor would wish to take advice from a range of sources about perhaps how to do that, but there's no obligation on the chiropractor to continue to provide care.
Well, thank you for walking me through some of these key points within the Code of Professional Practice, particularly pertaining to professional boundaries. Just lastly then, perhaps if each of you had one key takeaway that you wanted to share, what would that be?
Well, I'd pick up the point about ceasing care. It is really important that a chiropractor doesn't feel obliged to continue care in circumstances where a boundary is being breached or at risk of being breached. And there are great sources of support to go to ensure that that's not the case.
I think for me, to sort of follow on from that, it's about preparation. When those sort of situations happen, you know, there's a lot going on, and that's not the time to be thinking about, oh, what do I need to do here? So prepare. Think about, if you're going to cease care, what do you need to be thinking about when that situation arises? Make a quick note of it. For somebody working in a bigger clinic, it might be writing a policy, but if you're working on your own, it's just having a quick note somewhere that you can turn to when that situation unfortunately arises. Similarly for, if you feel like a professional boundary is being crossed, prepare. Think about who you'll contact. Who will you get in touch with for support? Preparing for having, if you need a chaperone or somebody else in the room, just have a think about the situation before it arises. That's going to be key. That's going to make such a difference.
Yeah, and I think bringing that all together, I think a main point for me would be people being able to get in contact with us and not being afraid to contact us. We're there to support. So yeah, get in contact with us via phone or email, whatever it might be. We are there to help and support you guys.
3 great messages to leave us with. Thank you so much. You can see the code online at gcc-uk.org, and the monthly GCC newsletter will continue to feature advice and details about the code. And of course, there's always updated content online and on social media. We're creating 5 other videos just like this one with other sections of the code covered. So we'll see you there, and thank you for watching.